What if I told you that the success of D-Day, the largest military invasion in human history, depended entirely on whether the Nazis would believe the lies of a Spanish chicken farmer's daughter who could barely read or write? This is the incredible true story of Joan Pujol García, codenamed Garbo, the most successful double agent in World War II, whose elaborate deception literally changed the course of history. The story begins in 1940 with Joan Pujol García, a 28-year-old Spanish man living in Barcelona. Spain was officially neutral in World War II, but Joan had witnessed the horrors of the Spanish Civil War and despised fascism with every fiber of his being. He wanted to help the Allies defeat Hitler, but there was just one problem. Nobody wanted his help. Joan was nobody special by conventional standards. He'd failed at running a chicken farm, couldn't hold down a steady job, and had no military experience. But he had something far more valuable than credentials. He had an imagination that would make Hollywood screenwriters jealous, and the audacity to pull off one of the greatest cons in human history. In early 1941, Joan walked into the British Embassy in Madrid and offered his services as a spy. The British intelligence officers took one look at this unremarkable chicken farmer and politely showed him the door. Undeterred, Joan tried the Americans. Same result. Then he tried again with the British. Rejection after rejection. Most people would have given up. Joan Pujol García got creative. If the Allies wouldn't hire him as a spy, Joan decided, he'd become a Nazi spy and then betray them. In February 1941, Joan walked into the German embassy in Madrid and convinced them he was a Spanish government official who traveled frequently and had access to valuable intelligence. The Germans, desperate for agents in Britain, were immediately interested. Here's where Joan's genius became apparent. He told the Germans he could travel to London and establish a spy network. The Nazis were thrilled and began paying him a substantial salary to be their eyes and ears in Britain. There was just one tiny detail Joan forgot to mention. He had never been to Britain in his life and had no intention of going there. What Joan did next was so audacious, it seems impossible. Using nothing but guidebooks, maps, train schedules, and British magazines he found in Barcelona's public library, Joan began sending the Germans detailed intelligence reports about British military installations, troop movements, and strategic plans. He didn't just send reports. He created an entire fictional spy network. He invented 27 different sub-agents, each with detailed backstories, personalities, and specialized knowledge. There was Agent 2, a pilot in the Royal Air Force. Agent 3, a Venezuelan student at Cambridge. Agent 4, a Gibraltarian waiter with access to military officers. Joan gave each fictional agent distinct writing styles, political views, and personal quirks. He created their love lives, their financial problems, their family relationships. Some of his imaginary spies even had imaginary romantic relationships with each other. The Germans ate it up. Joan's reports were so detailed and convincing that the Nazi high command considered him their most valuable agent in Britain. They gave him the codename Arabelle and increased his salary multiple times. But here's the beautiful part. Every single piece of intelligence Joan sent was either completely fabricated or deliberately misleading. In 1942, British intelligence officers monitoring German communications kept seeing references to incredibly detailed reports from an agent called Arabelle operating in London. The problem was, they had no idea who this person was, and some of his intelligence was alarmingly accurate. The British were terrified. Who was this super spy operating right under their noses? It took months of investigation before they realized the truth. Their most dangerous enemy spy didn't actually exist. Joan was creating all his intelligence from Barcelona, using educated guesses, propaganda, and an incredibly detailed understanding of how military organizations work. When the British finally tracked down Joan Pujol García. Their first instinct was to arrest him. Then they realized they'd found something much more valuable than a prisoner. They'd found the greatest liar in the history of espionage. In April 1942, British intelligence smuggled Joan out of Spain and brought him to London, where he was given a new codename, Garbo, after the famous actress Greta Garbo, because like her, he was the master of dramatic performance. Now working officially for the British, Joan's mission expanded dramatically. Instead of just sending false intelligence to confuse the Germans, he was tasked with the most critical deception operation of World War II, convincing the Nazis that the D-Day invasion would happen somewhere other than Normandy. The stakes couldn't have been higher. If the Germans knew where and when the Allies were planning to invade, they could concentrate their forces and potentially repel the invasion entirely. The fate of Europe hung in the balance. For 2 years leading up to D-Day, Joan worked with British intelligence to craft the most elaborate deception in military history. His fictional spy network grew to include detailed reports about a massive Allied army group stationed in southeast England, preparing to invade at Pas-de-Calais, exactly where the Germans expected the invasion to come. Joan's reports described American General George Patton commanding this fictional army. They detailed fake military exercises, fabricated equipment shipments, and invented radio communications. The British military even created physical props to support Joan's lies. Inflatable tanks, fake landing craft, and dummy airfields that German reconnaissance flights would photograph. But Joan's masterstroke wasn't the fake army. It was the timing of his deception. On June 6, 1944, as Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy, Joan sent an urgent message to his German handlers. Have confirmed major Allied assault on Normandy coast. However, intelligence suggests this is diversionary attack. Main invasion force still preparing to assault Pas-de-Calais within 48 hours. The Germans believed him completely. Even as Allied forces were fighting their way inland from Normandy, the German High Command held back crucial reinforcements, convinced that the real invasion was still coming at Pas-de-Calais. Here's the most incredible part of this story. Joan's deception worked so well that for 7 critical weeks after D-Day, the Germans kept an entire army group, over 150,000 troops, stationed at Pas-de-Calais, waiting for an invasion that would never come. Those 150,000 German soldiers could have been rushed to Normandy to crush the Allied beachhead. Instead, they sat in their positions, trusting the intelligence from a Spanish chicken farmer who was making everything up. Military historians agree, without Joan's deception, D-Day might have failed. The course of World War II, the fate of millions of lives, and the shape of the modern world hung on whether Nazi intelligence officers would believe the lies of one man. They believed every word. By the end of the war, Joan Pujol García had accomplished something unprecedented in the history of espionage. He received military honors from both sides of the conflict. The Germans, still believing he was their most valuable spy, awarded him the Iron Cross. The British made him a member of the Order of the British Empire. Joan remains the only person in history to receive top military honors from both Nazi Germany and the Allied forces. After the war, Joan wanted nothing more than to disappear. He'd played the most dangerous game imaginable for 4 years, lying to people who would have tortured and killed him if they discovered the truth. The stress had been enormous, and he was exhausted. The British helped him fake his own death and start a new life. For decades, the world believed Joan Pujol García had died shortly after the war ended. In reality, he moved to Venezuela, where he ran a small business and lived quietly with his family. It wasn't until the 1980s that a British intelligence historian tracked him down and convinced him to tell his story publicly. When you think about World War II heroes, you probably picture soldiers storming beaches, pilots flying dangerous missions, or resistance fighters sabotaging Nazi operations. You probably don't picture a failed chicken farmer sitting in a small apartment in Barcelona, crafting elaborate lies with nothing but imagination and library books. But Joan Pujol García's contribution to Allied victory was as significant as any general or admiral. His fictional spy network influenced major German strategic decisions for over 3 years. His lies diverted crucial resources away from actual military targets. His deception gave the Allies the element of surprise when they needed it most. Most remarkably, Joan achieved all of this not through violence or military might, but through pure creativity and psychological manipulation. He understood something profound about human nature. People believe what they want to believe, especially when it confirms their existing assumptions. The Germans expected their most valuable spy to be operating from London, so they believed Joan was in London. They expected the main Allied invasion to come at Pas-de-Calais, so they believed Joan's reports confirming their expectations. They wanted to believe they had a super spy providing crucial intelligence, so they believed every elaborate detail Joan invented. Joan's story reveals something fascinating about World War II that most people don't realize. Some of the most decisive battles weren't fought with tanks and planes, but with lies and deception. The Allied victory wasn't just about industrial capacity or military strategy. It was about convincing the enemy to make catastrophic mistakes. Joan Pujol García proved that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't a bomb or a bullet, but a really convincing lie told by someone brave enough to risk everything. In an age of total warfare involving millions of soldiers and unprecedented destruction, the fate of nations came down to whether one man could keep his story straight while lying to the most dangerous people on earth. He kept his story straight for 4 years. And because he did, Hitler's 1,000-year Reich lasted only 12. Joan Pujol García died in 1988 in Venezuela, finally at peace after decades of living quietly under his assumed identity. By then, his story had become legendary among intelligence professionals, but remained largely unknown to the general public. Today, Joan is remembered as one of the most successful spies in history, but that designation somehow seems inadequate. He wasn't just a spy. He was an artist whose medium was deception, a playwright whose stage was the entire European continent, and a performer whose audience held the power to destroy civilization. His story reminds us that history's greatest moments often turn on the actions of the most unlikely heroes. The success of D-Day, the operation that began the liberation of Europe and the defeat of Nazi Germany, depended on the imagination of a man who had failed at farming chickens, but succeeded at something far more important, understanding that sometimes the most powerful truth is a perfectly crafted lie. Joan Pujol García never fired a shot in World War II. He never flew a combat mission or led troops into battle. But through sheer audacity and creativity, he helped save the world. And the most incredible part? Almost everything you just read actually happened. In a war filled with unbelievable true stories, Joan's might be the most unbelievable of all. The only fiction in this story were the lies he told the Nazis. Everything else, the fake spy network, the elaborate deception, the German honors, the decisive impact on D-Day, is documented historical fact. Sometimes reality really is stranger than fiction. And sometimes, the fate of the world depends on one person's ability to make the impossible seem absolutely believable.